Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. So I'm doing another video, as you can see. For this video, I wanted to discuss my top 10 Facts of Life episodes. Now, if you don't know what the Facts of Life is, it's a spin-off television series of the television show Diff'rent Strokes. In the first season, the housekeeper was a character by the name of Mrs. Garrett, and they did a spin-off series for her called The Facts of Life, where it takes place at this all-girls boarding school, and she's the house mother. She later becomes a school nutritionist, and it's basically her guiding these girls through growing up and adolescence. The first season was like the girl students were about 7 or 8 characters. But after that, the rest of the series revolved around these 4 girls: Blair, Jo, Natalie, and Tootie. And then in the final 2 seasons, season 8 and 9, Mrs. Garrett leaves the show. Charlotte Rae leaves the show because she had been doing this character for a very long time. And Cloris Leachman steps into the series as Mrs. Garrett's sister, named Beverly. So it just surrounds all of them. I think it's one of my favorite shows, not only because it's an all-woman cast, but it really shows the relationship between these girls, their mentors, and it was one of the very few shows back then that discussed very important issues that not a lot of shows really discuss anymore. And I'll get into that with these lists. Now, with this list, I'm not going to be ranking them in any particular order because there's just so many of them and I can't decide which is my favorite. And I'll probably be saying that with a lot of my top 10 with other shows I'll do in not any particular order, because there are series that have so many different episodes I can't decide which is my favorite one. So let's get into the video. The first one we're going to start off with, The Facts of Life Go to Paris. And this was a television movie that they actually shot in Paris, where the girls and Mrs. Garrett go to Paris for a summer vacation. Mrs. Garrett goes to a cooking school, and the girls go to summer school in Paris. This first segment, the trip starts off not what they expect. The school in Paris for the girls is very, very strict, and they actually ended up on their final leg of the trip end up visiting Paris for the last few days of their trip and escape from the group because the headmistress is not very nice, and Mrs. Garrett is having a bad experience because she's the only woman in a class full of men, and the head chef is very critical of her because she's American and she's a woman. But it's ultimately them going on their own adventures in Paris. Jo ends up having a love interest in Paris. Blair winds up wanting a French romance, doesn't get that, but ends up enjoying herself at the very end. Then Natalie and Tootie end up meeting this writer who's kind of like been in this writer's block and helps him write an article about Paris before he gets fired because he's gone to multiple jobs. And he starts out as a drunk, but through the course of that, he gets his mojo back. But it was really cool just seeing the countryside of Paris and Paris itself, and I feel that was pretty cool. There's another movie called The Facts of Life Down Under, where they actually end up filming in Australia, but that's in the later seasons. Like, I think season 8 probably, I don't know. The next episode we're coming into, the next on my list is Come Back to the Truck Stop, Natalie Green. This is season 7, episode 8. Now, in this episode, Natalie Green is on a cross-country tour. The bike that she's using in this episode ends up breaking down, and she ends up in a truck stop. And in the show, she's an aspiring journalist / writer. So in this episode, she ends up writing a creative story in the diner, and the other characters in the show end up being the characters in the episode. And it's just really funny to see her creative process in this. And at this point in the series, George Clooney makes his debut in the Facts of Life series for a short period of time. But he's in this episode too as different characters. Like, one minute he's a bus driver, another waiter, then finally he's a pilot. But that's it too. Jo ends up being the head waitress in the episode. Blair is a aristocrat, but in the series she's from a family of privilege and wealth, so that's not far off from her character in the show and then in the episode. And then Tootie is a female pilot, similar to like Amelia Earhart, and Mrs. Garrett ends up playing one of the waitresses in there too, so that's fun. Coming up next is Post Christmas Card. This is season 8, episode 14. Now, in this episode, Cloris Leachman is already in the series, but it revolves around the holiday seasons has ended. They're cleaning up after the holidays, and each of the characters compete in this new resolution competition to see who can keep their New Year's resolution the longest. And in this episode, Natalie ends up getting her first credit card from the bank, and Blair kind of misguides her a little bit to use her credit card, where she explains whenever you use a credit card, you just pay a small amount of the balance at the end of each month. And I like this episode because it can really show you how out of hand you can use a credit card, or you get in debt in general, even with the debit card. So even though that's like a small moral issue in the show, I feel like that's a really important topic to cover about using credit cards and debit cards wisely. The next one is The Summer of '84. This is season 6, episode 1. Now, in this episode, everybody's come back from their summer vacation, getting ready to do the next semester of school, and they all sit down and have this dinner, and they talk about their experiences over the summer. With this, like, each character has their own side story. With Tootie, she's an aspiring actress throughout the series, and in this episode, she's at a lodge with Cape Cod with Natalie on vacation, and she ends up meeting a casting director, and she ends up dressing up a lot older than she actually is, and unfortunately doesn't get the part she's trying out for. In that same vacation, Natalie and Tootie are playing a game in the rec room, and this little annoying boy just gets on Natalie's nerves just a teeny bit too much, and is very frustrated with that. The next part of that episode, Mrs. Garrett and Jo end up spending a weekend in Atlantic City, and Mrs. Garrett ends up meeting a beau who's a piano player in the lounge that they're sitting at, and she goes up to him, and they sing and play the piano together, and it was really cute. They end up leaving the lounge just to explore Atlantic City a little bit, and then when they come back, the manager's upset that the guy's not at the piano playing, and they were just lucky that, surprisingly, Jo ends up playing the piano, and it's like a hidden talent of hers that she can actually sing and play the piano that the rest of her friends don't know. But it was really cool to see Jo get behind the piano. And then Blair's summer story, everybody assumes she goes to Paris and shop, and New York's and shop, but that wasn't just her whole summer. She ends up going to Idaho with her boyfriend at the time to visit his family, and they live on a farm. So she ends up getting into the farm tours and whatnot. Unfortunately, she sprains her ankle when feeding the pigs. So the rest of the time, she's just sitting with Cliff, her boyfriend's dad, on the porch, rocking and talking, and everybody's waiting on him and Mr. Um, Cliff's dad through the rest of the vacation. And they don't believe her, so she shows photos at the end of it. That was pretty cool. Coming up on the next episode is Take My Finals, Please. This is season 4, episode 22. Now, this is where the girls are facing their finals for school and high school, and this is Blair and Jo's senior year, and they end up doing an all-nighter, so it just goes throughout the episode of them, throughout the hours of the night, studying for a final. And honestly, I just like that episode because it just shows their process and them trying to get through the night. And in the middle of the night, they ended up ordering out pizza. But yeah, I just like that episode. The next one is Legacies, season 3, episode 11. Now, this is getting into a more serious issue. In this episode, the girls are still at Eastland, the boarding school, and Blair's family ends up making a donation, or they're building a school library, and they're donating the library into Blair's grandfather's name. And in that episode, since Natalie's the school journalist or school reporter, ends up doing some research on her grandfather, and it turned out that Blair's grandfather was a founding member, supporter, and financial contributor of the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK, and this kind of rocks Blair to her core. And in the series, Tootie is African American, so she's kind of, Blair's kind of like donating her clothes to Tootie out of pity. But it was just, I feel, a really good episode to cover because it would, like many episodes in the show, dealt with a very serious issue. The next one is Pretty Babies. This is season 2, episode 13. This is when a photographer ends up coming to the school to interview the girls for a chance at being a model with a photo agency. And it ends up Tootie is the one being picked. Now, this is also a slight issue because she's dealt with the issues like modeling in the industry would be like losing 10 pounds, making her look older than she actually is. And they come to the point where Mrs. Garrett says, like, it comes to the point where she says it's one step away from child pornography to me. And in a way, it's a bit of truth with that episode. The next one is Bought and Sold. This is season 2, episode 14. Now, remember how I said The Facts of Life is a spin-off series from Diff'rent Strokes? Well, in this episode, one of the kids in the show, Willis, makes a guest appearance, a small guest appearance in this episode, and it's basically Blair ends up being a sales girl for uh, uh, Countess Calvé Cosmetics, and she ends up buying more boxes than she's able to sell because the beauty products in the boxes sells to an older crowd than the girls at the school, and she ends up using Natalie as her muse, and it's kind of like buy friendship. She's like using Natalie to buy her friendship. And the Countess, who's actually the actress who's playing the Countess, is the wife in Green Acres, and she's like saying Natalie doesn't need all this makeup. She's beautiful the way she is. Stay beautiful and young. And I just found that episode very interesting. Yeah, so that was Bought and Sold, Season 2, Episode 14. The next one is The Facts of Love. This is Season 1, Episode 8, and this, in this episode, Mrs. Garrett ends up teaching a class about sex education for the girls, and the headmaster at the time is kind of very uncomfortable with it. He would feel much comfortable having the girls learn from a book. But in that episode, Blair kind of gets an experience with that with a boy she's dating. But that's kind of like a small but important issue to talk about. And then the last one on this list is IQ. This is Season 1, Episode 4. Now, in this episode, the girls are studying for their midterms, and Tootie accidentally sees the list of their IQ scores from the girls' previous schools. Now, like I said, in the first season, there were more girls, like about 7 or 8 girls. And there was Nancy ends up being she thinks she's the smartest girl in school, when it turns out, based on the IQs on the piece of paper that Tootie gets, it was a girl she was tutoring, and she gets very upset by this, and in that their mindset switch, and they end up failing their midterms. And it gets to the point where they talk about leaving the school, and Mrs. Garrett and one of the other teachers are like, IQs don't really matter. The headmaster begs to differ, and it gets to the point where Mrs. Garrett and the headmaster take a practice test to see who's smarter, showing that whether or not IQs don't really matter, and that's just a bit of humor in that. So that is my list for my top 10 Facts of Life episodes. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to comment at what you would like to see or what you liked about this video, thumbs up, comment down below, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button to see more. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye, guys.